Morning guys, and welcome back to I Like Old Watches 2. Now you may remember in a recent video upload on I Like Watches 2 I shared with you my experience visiting the Christopher Ward showroom, which coincidentally enough is in the very same town that I live in. It's literally a 2-minute walk up the road. If ever you're in the area, I strongly recommend you make an appointment and head down there to take a look at all their incredible watches. Now, when I went down there, I was lucky enough to spend half an hour with, well, Patrick, but more importantly, all of their beautiful watches. And the one that stood out to me was this incredibly well-proportioned, beautiful white dial C63 Sealander. And they very kindly lent me this watch to show you guys in a bit more detail. Now, in that video, I went on to unbox this watch and share with you my first impressions. I then went on to take some lovely shots of this watch, and in this video, I just want to show you this watch in a lot more detail. I'll show you some lovely macro shots, run through all the facts, figures, stats, and specifications, and yeah, take a bit of a deeper dive into this C63 Sealander. So let's head over to the light box and get on with it. Right, let me start by showing you this watch on my roughly average 7¼ inch-ish wrist, because they do offer this watch in larger sizes, and I think the temptation might be for many people to gravitate towards those larger watches, but I would encourage you to consider this smaller 36mm version, especially if you have a similar sized wrist to mine, because it is just beautifully proportioned and very, very comfortable. It's going to be less noticeable on your wrist than the larger watches, and I suspect you'll be more comfortable wearing this for longer periods of time, and I think it is a very, very nice looking watch. Now, of course, that is my personal opinion. I am tending to lean towards slightly smaller watches these days, but yeah, I like the look of this one on my 7¼ inch-ish wrist. This is definitely the size I would go for if I was going to be buying one of these Sealanders. But yeah, let's take a look at this watch in a little bit more detail. Right, I'm going to start by talking about the movement inside this watch. It is an automatic SW200 made by Sellita, but it's not your standard SW200. It is the newer and improved SW200-1, so it has the upgraded gearing, which is supposed to be more durable, less problematic, and yeah, if you're interested in reading more about that, I suggest you head over to Caliber Corner. And this movement is regulated to 4 standards, and very much like the Straum Damascus watch that I reviewed recently, the movement inside this is number 2 of 4, so it's regulated to between ±7 and 20 seconds a day. I've popped this one on the time grapher. Okay, I'm only showing it in one position, but it is running beautifully, smoothly, and consistently. 0 beat error, which I always like to see, +5 seconds a day consistently. Yeah, fantastic amplitude as well. So the movement inside this particular watch is very healthy. And they've chosen to personalise the rotor, which is a very nice touch, especially when you consider the display caseback. So yeah, very nice. Right, next up, I want to focus on the quality of the steel finishing, because if you're familiar with my channels and my reviews, you'll know, well, for watches like this, I tend to pay quite a lot of attention to the steel finishing, the quality of the brushing, the quality and the smoothness and mirror-like finishing of the polished surfaces, but also, quite importantly, the quality of the transitions between the two types of finishing. How well the watch transitions from the brushed surfaces to the polished surfaces, and there's a couple of those on this watch. If you're going to do things like put high polished chamfered edges around the bezel like you have on this watch, you need to make sure those transitions are beautifully crisp, and I have to say, looking at the shots that I've taken, I think they've done a pretty good job. This watch retails for £770, and the finishing definitely represents that. It's the sort of finishing I would expect to see on your, well, £1,000 to £1,500 watches. So yeah, they have definitely paid some attention to the quality of the steel finishing, in particular, I think, on the case, which is arguably the most important part of the watch. I will say maybe it would have been nice to have some high polished accents on the bracelet, and maybe these chamfered edges here to be high polished as well, just to match the watch with the bracelet and the clasp, because you do have some beautifully polished chamfered edges running the length of the case. But it's a fairly small criticism, because yeah, the case finishing is Very, very nice. And if you are familiar with my reviews, you'll know I also like to zoom in nice and close to the dials to have a good look at the applied indices and the hands. And yeah, again, the finishing on these elements are as good as what we're seeing on the case. Beautifully finished hands, a mix of brushed and polished surfaces on the hands. Each hand has a brushed strip down the centre of the hand, flanked by a couple of very nicely high polished facets. And the applied indices are equally nicely done. Again, a mix of polished and brushed surfaces. So yeah, I think they've tied in the dial very, very nicely to the finishing on the case. And I have to say, I do prefer their watches with this logo on it. I think one of the things that was perhaps discouraging me a little bit from showing their watches on my channel before was the name Christopher Ward on the dial. It just, I don't know, I just wasn't a fan of it. But yeah, I really do like this logo, and we're seeing it on the rotor and also on the clasp, which is nice. Oh, and also on the crown, look. So I think the overall build quality, fit and finish of this watch is definitely helping to justify the £770 price tag. But what about the way it looks? Well, the top-down view is very, very nice. I've mentioned already, it is a beautifully proportioned watch. I really like the look of this one on my wrist. But actually, when I was in the showroom, I spent a lot of time looking at watches from the side like this, because they've made the side profile of many of their watches look very, very similar to this. And those facets running down the side of the case are quite interesting and unusual, aren't they? They've definitely personalised and made their watches look, well, quite individual, I think. Yeah, a really nice side profile to the look of the cases. The bracelet and the clasp are fairly standard in their appearance. I think the clasp is a touch big. I'll come on to that in a minute. But yeah, overall, I think the case and the dial, the hands, the applied indices, it all looks, yeah, really, really smart. I think the bracelet is, well, fairly standard. There's not too much to separate it from other similar looking bracelets that I've seen. I think the end links do look like they match the case very, very nicely. They certainly match up with the lugs nicely. All good specifications, as you would expect. Solid end links, solid links, screw pins. Very nice screw pin action as well, actually. They feel like quality screw pins. Double-ended screw pins, but the screw action is very, very nice. A little bit fiddly, but yeah, once you get your head around it, very, very nice. Now, the clasp is a touch big, I think. The reason it's so big is because you have this on-the-fly adjustment system, which I have used. I've worn this watch while I've been borrowing it, and yeah, this on-the-fly adjustment system is definitely useful. I do find my wrists swell up and shrink down. Well, at least one or two of these adjustments throughout the course of the day. But yeah, it just makes the overall length and depth of that clasp, well, almost comparable to the case look. So yeah, that is just a minor complaint. Very nice buttons on the side of this outer shell. Nicely signed there as well, look. It is, well, what feels like a quality clasp. Just a touch too big and maybe missing some high polished chamfered edges, but yeah, beautifully signed, beautifully finished. I think the rest of the specifications are pretty strong as well. Sapphire crystal with AR coating, decent lume by the looks of it, blue lume on the hands and the applied indices, a screw down caseback and a screw down crown, 150 meters of water resistance. So speaking to Patrick during my visit, it looks like Christopher Ward are paying a lot of attention to what buyers and, well, followers of the brand are saying on social media, which is fantastic. And I think one of the things that people were commenting on was the name on the dial, and obviously they've responded by putting this logo on it, and they are trying to build their watches in accordance with yeah, what the public are asking for, which is fantastic. It's so good to hear that a brand the size of Christopher Ward is paying attention to what the watch community is saying, and that is definitely coming across when you look at the specifications and the build quality. Fantastic. So having spent more time recently with this watch in preparation for this video, but also reading through the comments section to my unboxing video and just reminding myself what this brand has to offer, I have decided I will be 100% buying a Christopher Ward watch at some point over the next few months, maybe towards the end of this year, the start of next year, and I'm looking for you guys to make some suggestions If you're familiar with my channels and my videos, you'll know the sorts of watches that I like, and maybe this is the perfect watch for me. I am familiar with their portfolio a little bit, but I know there are some huge Christopher Ward fans out there. So make some suggestions, please, in the comments section. I'm also in this very lucky position where I am very close to the showroom, so I am looking to perhaps pick up some more watches and borrow more watches over the next few months, not just to experience for myself, but to share with you guys on my channels. But yeah, it would be nice to be given some sort of guide. I really have been impressed with the watch and the whole experience of visiting the showroom, chatting to Patrick. I think they have a fantastic portfolio of watches. So yeah, strongly recommend them. Yes, they're not the most affordable watches, especially when you compare them to the other watches that I tend to review on my channels, but they still represent decent value for money when you look at what they're offering throughout their packaging, throughout the whole buying experience, and then the specifications, the movements. Yeah, impressive watch, beautiful watch actually, and I'll be sad to see this one go, but while I'm down there returning it, I'm sure I'll take a look at some of their other watches again, maybe even bring another one back, who knows. All right guys, thanks ever so much for watching, take care, you'll see me again very soon.